Hey guys, welcome back to another video and another installment into my Ghosty Glam series. If you guys are new, Ghosty Glam is where I sit down once a fortnight and tell you a ghost story or a story about a haunted building whilst I do my makeup. And I got the idea from Bailey Sarian, who has her own series called Murder, Mystery and Makeup Mondays. Go check her out if you haven't already. Most of these stories are based in the UK because that is where I am from, but there are some that are going to be situated around the world, like the last video, which was in France. If you guys haven't checked that out, the link will be in the description for you guys. But today's video is one that got me riled up and makes me so angry, and that is the Glencoe Massacre. If you guys don't know what the Glencoe Massacre was, I will sure to tell you, and I may get very annoyed with this story. I will try not to swear. If I do, I will probably bleep it out or cut it out. But yeah, that is today's video. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up. Also hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell to get notified of when I upload. All products that I use will be listed in the description box, so you guys can go pick them up if you really want to. Today's look probably isn't going to be a wearable look like the others have been, because this is such a big story that I have to do a bigger makeup look for you guys. But anyway, enough of me rambling on, let's get on with the video. This video contains graphic descriptions of brutal murders. Viewer discretion is advised. So I've already done my brows off camera and put some base makeup on my eyes, so my eyeshadow will stick to it. Also, if I look this way, it's because my notes are on my TV screen. I need them because it's such a big story, there's so many details to it. I do apologise, but we shall get into the video. So, King James II of England and the 7th of Scotland. Now, he was the second person called James to be King of England and the 7th person to be called James to be King of Scotland. That's why he was the 2nd of England and the 7th of Scotland. He took to the throne in 1685 and he had the support of the three kingdoms. Now, the three kingdoms were England, Ireland and Scotland. And the reason why he had their support was because he came from the Stuart household, which was a royal household. Most notably for Mary, Queen of Scots. She was actually named Mary Stuart. So he came from that household. Now, his transition to the throne went smoothly because the three kingdoms didn't want to cause a fuss due to previous bloody wars of the three kingdoms. So they just wanted a bit of peace and quiet basically at this point. Now, England at the time was a Protestant nation, but King James was Catholic, and he did actually want Britain to be Catholic again. He wanted Catholicism to be the British faith. And obviously Protestants didn't like that, so that obviously caused an issue. So the Protestants called for aid from allies in Holland, particularly William of Orange, who came to Britain to help overthrow King James. Now, in 1688, the Protestant Revolution began. So the revolution was successful and King James fled to the safety of France and the protection of King Louis XIV. However, fighting didn't stop because King James had a lot of supporters in Scotland, and these were known as the Jacobites. Now, the Jacobites wanted to restore King James to the throne. That was their aim. and there were many Jacobite rebellions, the first one taking place in 1689. Now, William of Orange was also concerned that France may invade Britain on behalf of King James to try and get the throne back. So John Dalrymple, the first Earl of Stair, acting on behalf of William of Orange, made a plan to win over the Highland clans that had sided with the Jacobites. So, to get the Highland clans to swear allegiance to William of Orange, Lord Stair would grant them indemnity. I can't say that word. Which means they wouldn't face any legal punishments for any of the supposed crimes, their lands and properties would legally be protected, and they would receive £12,000 to share amongst themselves. Seems like a pretty good deal back in the 1600s. So in June of 1691, the Highland chiefs were summoned to a meeting to discuss the terms of this agreement. 3 of the clans in attendance were the MacLeans, the Camerons and the MacDonalds. Now, the negotiations lasted several days, and leading them was John Campbell, the chief of the Campbell clan. John Campbell had already allied with William of Orange, but everything he did was for his own personal gain. He didn't care about anybody else. Now, John Campbell reassured William of Orange that I can get the job done because I'm a Highlander. They will listen to me. John explained the terms to the chiefs, and the chief of the Glencoe MacDonalds was not happy with the agreement anyway, and he was even more unhappy when John Campbell said that he would be keeping the MacDonald share of the money as compensation for all the cattle he had stolen. John Campbell also decided to add in some of his own made-up terms in order to try and get the Highland chiefs to sign straight away. And some of those were that if King James was to launch an invasion from France, the Highland chiefs would be released from their agreement and could fight on whichever side they chose. He also said to the Highland chiefs that he too would be released from his agreement and would fight on the side of King James against William of Orange. So the Highland chiefs thought they had everything to gain and nothing to lose from this agreement. But they were smart, they didn't sign straight away, and they waited. And they sent messengers to King James in France to get his opinion and his counsel on this agreement. So 2 months later, in August of 1691, William of Orange said that anybody who hadn't sworn allegiance to him by 31st of December the same year would suffer the utmost extremity of the law. What that meant, people didn't know. However, the Highland clans still waited upon signing the agreement, and William of Orange got frustrated with John Campbell and handed the task to Lord Stair. Now, King James wasn't able to conduct an invasion due to circumstances in France and sent the messages back with the message to tell the Highland chiefs to sign the agreement for their own protection. However, when travelling back, these messengers were arrested in London and told that they would only be released if they swore allegiance to William of Orange. Having already been detained for 3 days, they reluctantly bent the knee so they could be released. When they got to Scotland, they still had to travel to the Highlands. And William of Orange had already sent 400 troops to Fort William, which was situated in the Highlands, so he was already one step ahead. Clan rivalry was also a problem, and William of Orange knew this. And when the messengers got to Glengarry, they were detained again, and the clan of Glengarry made sure the message was only shared with other clans they were friendly with. This didn't include the MacDonalds. So when the message finally reached the MacDonalds, they had 24 hours before the deadline. And the oath of the agreement had to be done in front of a sheriff. The nearest sheriff was 60 miles away, and it was the middle of winter. Now, the leader of the MacDonalds was a guy called McIan, and he was an elderly guy, like an older guy, so it made the journey near impossible to complete in the short amount of time they had. So McIan and his 2 sons went to Fort William in hopes that they could take their oath there, but Colonel John Howell said it wouldn't be official. He wrote a letter to say that the MacDonalds did arrive at Fort William before the deadline, but they had to travel to the nearest sheriff, which was the same sheriff they would have had to travel to anyway, and he was in the opposite direction. Now, to try and get to the sheriff quicker, the MacDonalds travelled through Campbell territory, where they were detained for a few days, definitely missing the deadline. The Campbells would have known that they were missing the deadline as well, and then they were released. When they arrived at the sheriff's town, he was out of town and they had to wait for him to return, so they didn't actually take their oaths until the 6th of January. So once the MacDonalds had taken their oaths at the sheriff wrote a further letter stating that the MacDonalds had taken their oaths and included what was in Colonel Howell's letter as well. So when the MacDonalds arrived back home, they were informed that their oaths had been accepted and everything was fine. When the oaths and all the documentation, however, were presented to the Edinburgh Privy Council, it was noted that the MacDonalds were late upon taking their oaths and that they should be struck off the oath list. This decision was mainly led by John Campbell. Now, this news reached Lord Stair, who was thrilled at the news, as this is exactly what he wanted to happen. He also knew about John Campbell's fake deal, and that made him angry as the oaths weren't signed out of fear but just for the sake of it, and the Highland chiefs had no intention of upholding their oaths, or at least that's what he thought. So Lord Stair knew he had to make an example, and the example was the MacDonalds. Lord Stair sent an order that the military were to move against the MacDonalds, and this order landed on the desk of Colonel John Howell. Now, because John Howell had already helped the MacDonalds, he washed his hands of it. He was like, no, I'm not going to do this. And he passed it down to two people, Robert Duncanson and Lieutenant Hamilton. So on the 1st of February 1692, 200 redcoat soldiers, armed with muskets and swords, went to Glencoe and were led by Robert Campbell, the cousin of John Campbell. Now, it's unsure as to whether these soldiers knew why they were going to Glencoe. Some say the Campbell soldiers probably knew, and the others didn't. Now, they told the MacDonalds that they were seeking shelter on their journey north, and the MacDonalds let them in and stay, as they didn't know that they had been struck off from the oath list and believed they were under the protection of these soldiers. Also, one of MacIan's sons was married to a Campbell, and Robert Campbell was her uncle. So just a side note, I've done all the intricate lines off camera because it was proving too difficult to talk whilst trying to do it. Now, due to harsh weather conditions at the time of the year, the MacDonalds invited the soldiers into their homes where they fed them, washed them, allowed the soldiers to sleep, even allowed the soldiers to play with their children. And they stayed for the next 2 weeks. On the 12th of February 1692, a military messenger who was Robert Campbell's superior delivered a document from Duncanson saying, "You are hereby ordered to fall upon the rebels, the MacDonalds of Glencoe, and put all to the sword under 70. The orders also mentioned not to let MacIan or his sons escape. And gave a certain time for the massacre to start." Now, the plan was that Robert Campbell and his soldiers would start in the actual glen, and he would later be joined by Duncanson and 400 of his men at the south exit of the glen, and for Hamilton to be at the north exit with 400 of his men, ultimately trapping the MacDonalds in the glen. Robert Campbell instructed his soldiers of the orders out of earshot of the MacDonalds. So in the night of the 13th of February 1692, during a harsh blizzard, the soldiers woke up and began murdering their hosts and their families, including children. Duncanson and Hamilton never showed up for the massacre, but the soldiers moved north up the glen, pulling families out of their homes and murdering them before setting fire to their homes. Some of the soldiers were so horrified by the orders that they actually woke the families up and told them to escape, and told them basically what was happening at that time. Many of those that did try to escape, however, got lost in the blizzard and froze to death. This was women and children mainly, and the women were found holding their children frozen. So some of the clan men, including the chief MacIan, tried to fight back against the soldiers, but they were killed doing so. The chief's two sons, so MacIan's two sons, did manage to escape, and they did survive both the massacre and the blizzard, luckily. Those that did survive hid in the nearby mountains overlooking the glen, and they waited until the soldiers had left before they returned to the glen to bury their dead. So the aftermath of this is pretty poor, to say the least. I am absolutely appalled. So the British government tried to keep the massacre out of all written records and the press because of the nature of it. Robert Campbell, however, stupidly enough, got drunk, presumably due to the grief he suffered after the event and the guilt he had. And he left the order document in a coffee shop. This document was found by Jacobite sympathisers who were appalled by the orders that were given against the MacDonalds, and they smuggled the document to France, where it was published in the Paris Gazette in April 1692. At first, there was very little sympathy for the clan, and a commission was actually set up to determine whether there was a case of slaughter under trust. As both a capital offence and treason, it was difficult to bring a case against Lord Stair, as William of Orange himself had signed the orders. The commission therefore had to focus on whether the participants in this massacre exceeded their orders, not their legality, and concluded that Stair and Hamilton had a case to answer to. But again, the decision was ultimately left down to William of Orange. Stair was dismissed as Secretary of State, but he returned to government in 1700 and made ill by the last Stuart monarch, Queen Anne. An application for compensation by the survivors was ignored, and they had to rebuild their houses, and they also participated in the 1715 and the 1745 Jacobite risings. So there's some folklore around the massacre, and that is that a Scottish banshee called a quinniac was heard in the days leading up to the massacre. Now, she is considered to be an omen of death, and even if she is heard now, it's considered to be a sign of bad things to come. So, as for ghosts and hauntings, on the anniversary of the massacre, so the 13th of February, apparitions have been seen in the glen reenacting the massacre. This is accompanied by various cries and screams that can be heard throughout Glencoe. So guys, that is it for the story on the Glencoe Massacre. This is a really dark one and a really long one as well. I do apologise if it riles anybody up. It did really annoy me to find out that us British treat the Scottish like that. But yeah, that's the story of the Glencoe Massacre. If you guys like this video, hit the thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Comment down below anything you really want to, guys. If you have any suggestions for any places you want me to look into, leave them in the comment section and I will check them out for you guys. All products will be listed in the description along with my social media, and I shall see you in the next video. Bye guys!